Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I've worked in the mining and exploration industry as a geologist for over 30 years. And I spent a good portion of that time working in the oldest of old school boys clubs, the South African mining industry. And one of the things that happened was when I started off my career with my shiny new degree in geology, I was absolutely horrified to discover that I was a female geologist. And I'm still trying to figure out what the difference is between a geologist and a female geologist. So if anybody here happens to know, please do tell me. And at the same time, I discovered that at that time in South Africa, they did not employ women as geologists in the field or on the mines. And so there went my aspirations of working out in the field in remote areas, which is one of the reasons why I'd studied geology. Anyway, as some of you might know, the mining and exploration industry is a really, the mining and exploration industry is a really, apologies for the delay. I'm just getting a lot of things coming up on my screen to admit people. Let's try that again. So some of you might know that the mining and exploration industry is a very boom and bust industry. And when we go through a downturn, they lose geologists, and geologists have to eat, so they go off and do something else with their time. And they don't come back to geology. And then we get back into an upswing, and they're desperate for geologists. So what happened for me, which was a very lucky break, was they got into a situation where they were absolutely desperate for geologists. So they lowered their standards and employed me as a geologist on the mines. So that's why today I'm going to talk to you about shitty comments, because at the time I was the first woman to be employed on the mines as a geologist, and the pushback was absolutely enormous. So when it comes to talking about shitty comments, I really know about that. So let's look at some examples of shitty comments. And one of the things that I want to just say right up front is that I'm going to give you a few examples of shitty comments, and some of these shitty comments are really, really terrible. So just be warned. Nearly all of the shitty comments that I'm going to share with you were comments that were actually made to me. A couple of them were made to other people that I know. So examples of shitty comments. What? We can't have a woman doing this job. You do know there are snakes in the field. Aren't you scared? Men won't listen to a female geologist. Black men won't work for a white woman. Are you here to take the minutes? This was a comment that was made to somebody else. She didn't deserve that promotion. She's all sizzle and no steak. So you must be an affirmative action appointment. And is that your hand feeling up my leg? So what do shitty comments do? They put us down. They make us angry. They make us cry. They make us fume and fret. They make us run through endless scenarios of why that comment was unjustified. And they also make us endlessly justify why we have the right to actually be here. And eventually what happens is we internalize all of these comments. And that's when it gets dangerous. Because internalizing shitty comments leads to feeling we are not worthy, feeling we don't deserve to be in our roles and contribute, second guessing ourselves, constantly justifying ourselves, not positioning ourselves so that we are heard, questioning our right to apply for or to hope for that promotion, not positioning ourselves for that coveted promotion, and not applying for the job. Ultimately, taking these comments on board totally undermines our ability to work properly, and it also undermines our ability to contribute effectively. And eventually, that leads to burnout. And that's when women say it's all too much. They quit and they move on to something else. And I can honestly tell you that some of the lowest points in my career was when I saw other women just saying, you know what, this is just too much, and leaving. That's when I really felt like, why am I doing this? So let's look at some statistics. Indeed surveyed 1,000 women in the tech sector. And what they found was that 56% of women in tech leave before they reach mid-level. That's quite a horrifying statistic if you think about it. Why? Well, the reasons that they found people were leaving was a lack of pay equity, a lack of career advancement, slow salary growth, bias and discrimination, work-life balance, and sexual harassment, and inadequate parental leave. And I find that quite an interesting statistic, because quite often when you hear people talking about women leaving the industry, they say, it's, oh, well, you know, women, they go off and start families and then they leave. Quite clearly, there are a lot of other reasons why women leave. And when we think about shitty comments, what we're actually talking about is bias and discrimination. And another study, the Ramp Up study, looked at the status of women in Canada's mining and exploration sector. And they found that 30% left because of inflexible work arrangements, 14% because of workplace culture, and another 14% because of having to travel to remote locations, 12% because of bias and discrimination, 12% because of childcare or parental leave practices. And what we're looking at when we talk about shitty comments is workplace culture and bias and discrimination. So what we actually have is approximately 25% of women leaving because of the culture of bias and discrimination. And that's pretty horrifying. So how do we handle shitty comments? Well, the person who related this comment to me, are you here to take the minutes, was a relatively senior technical professional in our industry who had gone into a meeting, and a gentleman who had, if we can call him a gentleman, who had actually worked with her before and knew her, walked into the meeting and said, so what are you doing here? Are you here to take the minutes? And she didn't have a response at all. She just didn't know what to say. So if we think about how was she feeling when that comment was made to her? Well, basically, she was feeling all of these things. She was feeling put down, angry, she was fuming. She was thinking about why that comment was just so unjustified. And she was also justifying her right to be here. So now I used all these really cute pictures of children, and I didn't just do them because I think they're cute pictures. I did them because if you think about it, in that moment when that shitty comment was made to her, what's actually going on internally is she's having a little meltdown, okay? And that's what children do. If you think about it, why do kids have meltdown? It's because everything to little children is life or death crisis. They don't have, the resources to handle it. And also for little children, it's all about me. They haven't yet developed the sense of others. What about you? You're actually an adult. As adults, we know this isn't a life or death crisis, and we do have the resources to handle it, and it's not all about us. And one of the things that I really would like you to take away from this talk, if you take nothing else away from it, is that 99% of shitty comments are a whole lot more about the person who's actually making the comment than it is about us. It's what's going on for them. Maybe they're feeling insecure, threatened by having a woman doing the same sort of work that they're doing. I don't know, but there's something going on for them that's causing them to make that shitty comment. So as adults, we can stay in our rational brain. And when we're dealing with shitty comments, what we actually have to do is activate our adult mode, basically step into adult mode. Don't go into child mode and sort of react emotionally and sort of have a little meltdown there, but rather step into adult mode. And remember that this isn't a life and death crisis and that we have the resources to handle it. And it's not about me. And that's the adult mode motto. So let's look at 5 effective strategies that can help you deal with shitty comments. And the first strategy is the silent treatment. So she didn't deserve that promotion. She's all sizzle and no steak. This was made to somebody I know. And clearly what was going on here was the person who was making this comment probably thought they should have got the promotion and not her, right? And really, it just doesn't deserve a response. I mean, there's just no point in making any response whatsoever. So the formula for the silent treatment is basically just don't believe the lie, ignore it, and say nothing. And the benefits of the silent treatment is you conserve your energy and you simply just don't dignify it with a response. The second strategy is that actions speak louder than words. Now, when I started working on the mines as the first female who'd been employed as a geologist, the pushback was enormous, absolutely enormous. And one particularly vociferous mining engineer said, "What? We can't have a woman doing this job." And honestly, there was just a barrage of comments. And I realized that there was absolutely no ways that I could possibly handle all these comments. So I decided that I was just simply going to ignore them, say nothing, get on and do a darn good job. And interestingly enough, that's exactly what I did. And the person who made this comment, "What? We can't have a woman doing this job," ended up being one of my staunchest supporters on the mine, because I took over a job that another geologist had been doing. Basically, I had to log all these trenches. This geologist had a huge backlog of trenches that hadn't been logged, and I had to catch up that backlog. Basically, I ended up doing a better job than they'd been doing. And this person then ended up really supporting me. So the formula for actions speak louder than words is just simply don't believe the lie, ignore it, and do a good job. And the benefits is the proof is in the pudding. You don't get in a fight, and you get support and respect. The third one is cover your ass. And this is something that I teach a lot of people, and anybody who knows me well would know that it's one of the things that I say to a lot of my clients is put things in writing. So I was told men are simply not going to listen to a woman. And my response was, well, so what? They don't have to listen to me. I don't care. It's not my problem if they don't listen to me. And I'd go out every week, twice a week, onto the mine where I was the mine geologist, and I'd go around with the pit super, and we talk about what was going to the plant, what was going to the waste dump. I'd tell him, what needed to go to the plant, what needed to go to the waste dump, and I knew full well that he certainly wasn't going to listen to me. So what would I do? I'd go back to my office, and in the afternoon, I'd sit down and I'd write a memorandum. And say, as per our discussions this morning, these are my recommendations. I'd add maps, plans, whatever else I needed to. I would send it to the pit super and I would copy it to the chief geologist. And sure enough, what happened? He didn't listen to me. Surprise, surprise. And so when at the end of the month, when he hadn't made his grade, the assistant general manager, who's essentially chief operations officer, as we know the term today, was out there on the mine trying to find out what the hell was going on. Why haven't you made grade? And of course, the pit super was saying, well, it's that bloody useless geologist. She hasn't got a clue what she's doing, right? And so, of course, I got called out to please come explain myself. And so I asked lots of questions, what did you do? What went through the plant? What went to the dump, etc. And got him to answer all those questions. And then when he'd finished, telling us what he'd done, I pulled out my memorandum and I said, well, had you followed my recommendations, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I only ever had to do that once. And after that, I got incredibly good support from the assistant general manager. So much so that it was a custom on the mine that all the head of geology, head of metallurgy, etc., would go out with assistant general manager once a month, and they'd go to all the operations and discuss what was going on. And one day I came into the office to find the chief geologist with a huge smile on his face, and he said, "Oh, I wish you could have been there this morning." And I said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, we were on our mine tour, and this particular pit superintendent was saying, I'm doing this and I'm doing that." He was wanting to look smart and clever in front of the assistant general manager. And the assistant general manager simply said, "Have you spoken to Rocky about this?" Because Rocky was his nickname for me. And the guy went, no. And he said, "Don't you ever do another effing thing on this effing mine without talking to Rocky first," which really pleased my manager immensely, because this particular pit super used to give all the geologists a hard time. He made an extra special effort for me, seeing that I was female. So the formula for cover your ass is basically, don't make it your problem. Ignore it. Document. Document, document, document. Publicize. So copy, if you're writing a memorandum, copy it to the relevant people and get support that way. The benefits of covering your ass is you look great, they look like a fool, and you get support and respect. Scenario number 4 is step into their shoes. So I got told black men won't work for a white woman. And my response was, is that really true? So the trenching project that I took over, as I mentioned, there was this huge backlog and I was busy catching it up. But the backlog was such that some of the trenches had been dug so long ago that they had literally blown closed with wind-blown sand. And I started backwards, and eventually I got to those trenches that hadn't been logged, that had blown closed. And I went to the trenching gang and I spoke to the team leader. The trenching gang was a gang of black men and the team leader was a black man. And I said to him, "Please, I really need some help. I need him to go and dig those trenches out that have blown closed with wind-blown sand." And he said to me, "No." So I said, okay. And so I sort of asked him, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, you see, my team get a bonus. We have a certain meterage of trenches to dig every month. And if we dig more than that meterage, we get a bonus. And I am not giving up my team's bonus to go and redo work that we've already done and go and dig out those trenches just because the geologist didn't dig it." Well, hell, I couldn't do anything but agree with him. I mean, I'd have said the same thing. No ways. I'm not going to sacrifice my team's bonus just because the geologist didn't get their act together to log the trenches in time. So I said to him, "Yeah, no, that makes sense." So I said, "Tell me, do you by any chance have a shovel?" And he looked at me and he said, I said, "A spare shovel?" And he said, "Yeah." So I said, "Well, could I borrow it?" And he said, "Yeah." So I grabbed the shovel and I jumped into the trench and I started digging it out. And the next thing I looked up and I had all these faces looking down at me, and they were horrified because they'd never seen a white woman in a trench digging it out. And they all jumped into the trench with me and we all happily dug the trench out. And then I was able to sit down with the team leader and he said, I'll help you. That's no problem, I'll help you. But we sat down and we worked out a plan so that he wouldn't lose his bonus for his team. And at the same time, he'd dig a couple of trenches out for me, slowly enough that I could get them logged without them blowing closed again. And what was really interesting, after people telling me that black men won't work for a white woman, I actually had the best production out of that team, out of all of the geologists and their teams. So the formula for stepping into their shoes is don't believe the lie. If I had believed that, black men wouldn't work for a white woman, when that team leader told me, "Nope, I'm not going to do this," what would I have done? I would have been in a real pickle. Just ignore it. Have curiosity and respect and consideration for other people. And that goes a long way. The benefits of stepping into their shoes is you form good working relationships. It gets the job done, and it motivates better performance. My fifth and final strategy is handing it straight back. Are you here to take the minutes? Interestingly enough, when this person told me the story about, are you here to take the minutes? My immediate response was, your response should have simply been, no, I thought you were. So you must be an affirmative action appointment. Interestingly enough, when I was given a senior position at head office, I went down to lunch with the rest of the people in my department, and the chap sitting next to me turned to me and said, so you must be an affirmative action appointment. He must have seen my face, sort of look of shock and horror. And so he sort of started to backpedal, and he said, well, either that or you must be bloody good. So I said to him, I guess you must be right. Had I been white and male, I could have been bloody useless and they still would have given me the job. And he was absolutely quite horrified. Interestingly enough, we went on to become quite good friends and good colleagues. And the number of times he turned around and said to me, you know, Daryl, I never thought about it. It never even occurred to me. It's basically what you would call unconscious bias. And by just making a comment like that, it made him stop and think and change those, change that bias that he had. I went off to Whistler one day with my partner and a friend. And when we got into the gondola, there were already 5 people in the gondola. There were 5 guys, and these guys were obviously all together and they were going off skiing for the day. And we sort of squashed into the gondola, and there was all this sort of like joking and saying, oh, well, it's really squashy in here. And the guy next to me turns around and says, is that your hand feeling up my leg? And my immediate response was, you wish. At which point all of his mates burst out laughing, and he was the butt of the joke, not me. And I really didn't feel bad about making him the butt of the joke, because had I been a really young and shy woman, I would have been absolutely mortified and embarrassed by that comment. And what he was really doing is embarrassing me, or trying to embarrass me, in order to make himself look good in front of his mates. So the formula for handing it straight back is, don't believe the lie. Make a joke at their expense. Make a joke that elevates you. And the benefits of handing it straight back is, it can cause fun and humor. And it also highlights the absurdity of some of these comments. And it also creates awareness. It sounds so difficult, right? I mean, in the moment, it's really hard to think of a comeback. So let me tell you a true story. When I started out working, I was working as a typist in what they call a personnel department, which is essentially an HR department. And there were 2 personnel officers. One was female and one was male. And I arrived early on my first day of work. I was working as a typist to save up the money to put myself through university so that I could become a geologist, not a female geologist, a geologist. And I arrived bright and early, and I went up to the first floor, and at the entrance to the department were these glass doors, and I saw through the glass doors that there was only one person in the department, and it was the male personnel officer. And I was too shy and terrified to walk into that room. So what did I do? I turned tail, walked down the stairs, walked out the building, and stood on the corner, and I watched the entrance, and I waited until the female personnel officer arrived for work, and then I followed her into the building and went upstairs. So fast forward a good number of years. When I was employed at head office in a really senior management position, the person who employed me wanted to make sure that they got the right person for this job. And he spoke to every single person I'd ever worked with. And one man manager, on whose mind I had been the resident geologist, highly recommended me for the job. But he said, there's just one thing you need to know about Daryl. And so this person said, what's that? And he said, she's one woman who doesn't take any shit from anybody. So how did I go from being the shy, terrified little person to being one woman, having a reputation of being a woman who just doesn't take any shit from anybody. Basically, it takes practice. But it also takes something else, and that is don't internalize these things, because I had a very strong belief that I had just the same right as anybody else to be here and to do this job. And that strong belief helped me to say, look, I'm not taking this. And then on top of that, it just took practice. So homework for you. Memorize the adult motto. This isn't a life or death crisis, and I have the resources to handle it. And most importantly, it's not about me. Don't take it on, don't internalize it. It really isn't about you. And then practice the strategies. And it really is a case of figuring out, which of these strategies to employ in the moment. Some comments simply they're just not worth even responding to. Just ignore them. The other thing is just ignore the comments and get on and do a good job. Actions often speak louder than words. And cover your ass. Document things, because that gives you backup. I mean, even if you have somebody, say, for example, who's bullying you in the workplace, just document every single incident, date, time, and this is what's happened. Date, time, and this is what happens. It takes the emotion out of it. It takes the, uncertainty out of it. And when you look back at that, you can see, okay, I'm not imagining this. This is just not okay. And you have a record that you can use. The other strategy is just stepping into their shoes. Sometimes just being curious and finding out, like, okay, so what's going on for you that you need to make that comment, or what's really happening here? What's the real issue, not what they tell me it is. And then the last but not least, learning how to hand it straight back. I never was able to just come back like that, but now these days, most times I'm able to come back with a comment pretty smartly. And that just took practice, lots of it. So if you'd like to talk to me a little bit more about this, please stay in touch. You can always get hold of me, and I'm really happy to chat to anybody if you'd like to talk more about these strategies.